I would say, building refugia, like how do I create small pockets of life that are safe from all of this chaos, right? And how is that a really important practice? So there's a lot of pieces of that. And then my newest book, which is Ecospirituality for the 20th Century, does have a chapter on regeneration, among some other chapters. And that I would say is my broadest scale book, where it's sort of like, how do we rebuild human society and rebuild ourselves using these techniques? So they're all kind of at different scopes and with different focuses, but my broad theme that I've been exploring in different ways is, yeah, how do we become good ancestors, and how do we use nature spirituality as a foundation for regenerative practices in the world, and how do we provide a counter to all of the sort of dystopian narratives that we are being fed right now, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 165 of Toward a Better Life.
Takes the bite. Soft is the cry that she has heard. Moonbeams cast on the forest floor are lighting my way to a secret door. Night spirit calling me into the darkness of the trees, calling me to where the green one breathes, the shadow light of the falling leaves. Sweet is the rain that roots the seeds, with a promise that's kept in the darkening trees. Moonbeams cast on the forest floor are lighting my way to a secret door. Moonbeams cast on the forest floor are lighting my way to a secret door.
That was Spiral Dance with their song The Door to usher in and honor spring, offered with their permission. Now this is Kevin Pennell, and that song acknowledges the Green Man and his magical time of the year, when we celebrate spring for the Northern Hemisphere and fall's equinox for the Southern. And that song, by the way, is one of the featured songs from their Magic album, available through their website or Bandcamp, and there's a link in the show notes for their work as well. So, thanks, dear listener, for tuning into the program. And regardless of where in the world you might be, our lives can flow with the rhythm, the natural rhythm of life, a natural flow of life to ultimately aim to balance. And this is the timeless message of Toward a Better Life, going with the flow in the rhythm of life. And that's also performed through implementing balance, harmony, compassion, kindness into our lives personally, spiritually, and culturally. And this all begins with each one of us, you and I, as individuals, making changes little by little. And just living our truth is one way to do that. I like to share these concepts on the podcast from around the world, seeking others of the same spirit, heart, and mind. Now, through the application of the many insights and teachings from the episodes, we can become better souls, better spirits, and true human beings that continue a journey to wholeness and harmony, not only for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren, but for the generations to come. I also offer the opportunity for you and encourage you and thank those of you that have provided your music, your prose, poetry, or storytelling on the program. Please do subscribe to the program if you haven't done so already through your favorite podcast platform, and do keep following for weekly magical insights to earth-based spirituality, self-development, self-care. Also, remember to support the program by leaving a review on Apple and Spotify podcast. It only takes a moment to leave that review. Do visit my website, towardabetterlife.com, and you can contact me there to learn more about your free discovery call to help you on your own journey, along with some prior episodes, learning opportunities, and services that I offer outside the podcast, plus a few accessories to assist you on your journey. And that website, well, it also shares information about my upcoming events, like a CEU coming up in Charleston, South Carolina at the end of April. Contact me through my website or send inquiries to kevin@towardabetterlife.com for this and other inquiries that you might have. Well, I am welcoming back my friend Dana O'Driscoll to the program today to celebrate the spring equinox. Now, as you may recall from previous episodes, Dana currently serves as the Grand Archdruid of the Ancient Order of Druids in America. A lifelong student of nature spirituality and Druidry, she's been practicing for like 18 years. And by the way, I think that'd be closer to 20 now, according to what we talked about on the podcast. And Dana, well, she's authored multiple books that focus on nature spirituality and neopagan practices through her lenses of reverence, respect, and direct action on behalf of the living earth. Her writings include Ecospirituality for the 21st Century, which she co-authored with Nate Summers, and we talked about that some months ago here on the program. She also wrote Land Healing, Physical, Metaphysical, and Ritual Approaches to Healing the Earth. And she's also painted and published Oracle Tarot decks and books, and Tarot of the Trees, Plant Spirit Oracle, and TreeLore Oracle. A few years ago, Dana wrote Sacred Actions, Living the Wheel of the Year through Earth-Centered Sustainable Practices, and the Sacred Actions Journal. Now, these works enlighten and encourage easy ways to be an active participant, a family member, if you will, with the land. And spring, well, it's an ideal time to connect with the land around us, isn't it? So we can be actively creating with spring. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. So please do welcome Dana O'Driscoll to this episode of Toward a Better Life. I'm truly delighted to welcome back Dana O'Driscoll, the Chief of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, to the episode today. You've been on a couple of times. It's always a joy. And we've talked about your latest book a while back. And we're going to talk a little bit about another book today. But hi there. Hi, Dana.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going. It's going really well. And welcome to spring. Yay.
Thank you. Welcome to spring indeed.
Yeah. So you mentioned before we recorded you had a couple of thoughts on spring. So let's start with that if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, I think I live on the East Coast of the United States. I live in Western Pennsylvania in the Laurel Highlands area. And, when I think about spring, the very first sign of spring where I live is the maple trees start running.
Mm-hmm.
And typically they start running at Imbolc. They are a little late this year. And then we usually do our maple sugaring in this area sometime around the spring equinox. So I like to think about the maples and their sort of beautiful sap that is running, even though you can't see it unless you tap the tree, which of course we do with gratitude, reverence, and asking permission. And we do it in a ceremonial way every year. And we sing to the trees and we ask permission and make offerings and tap them. And then every day leading up to the spring equinox, you can go out and you can drink the sap fresh from the bucket. And on a good day, you can get a gallon or more of sap from a mature sugar maple tree. So to me, that's one of my very favorite activities that sort of I feel like carries me through the last part of winter and moves me into the spring is that experience of connecting with the maple trees and drinking the sap and then boiling it down into maple sugar or maple syrup.
And honest, we're gonna move towards some other stuff, but you just brought back a whole slew of memories for me because I remember many, many years ago when I lived in Western New York, and there was a fellow that was in a church that I was involved with who had a maple business, maple sugar business. And he had actually, we had like, I think, I want to say at least two, maybe three very mature maples on our
Mhm.
land. And it was in town, and so he couldn't do the typical routine of he had the giant white barrels and he had all
Mhm.
the lines running and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the fluid
yeah.
line. Not mine, no. What he did with mine is he did it the old-fashioned way with the buckets and the
Yep. That's what we do.
spouts, and it was great.
Hmm.
But and I know exactly what you're talking about because you go out there and I would help him collect it, but you
Hmm.
just can't help yourself. You just have to go in and taste some of that sap
Yeah,
just
and it's
because.
just so, oh, it's so vitalizing. It's just like this like pure energy right from the tree and it's magnificent. Yeah, we do it the old-fashioned way. We're just doing it for ourselves as sort of a seasonal activity. So we don't do any of the commercial like big lines running into big
Hmm.
vats and big boil systems. We just boil it over our outdoor. We have an outdoor kitchen. We have a little sap boiler we set up.
I
We
often,
made a rocket stove sap boiler
oh,
basically.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I often think when we talk about that sort of thing, it really is the lifeblood of the tree, and we're sharing the lifeblood of the tree, and
Mhm.
that's definitely a part of respect and reverence
Hmm.
for connecting with it at another level. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, we
it's
actually did wassailing for the trees prior to this. So the traditional dates are either January 6th or January 17th, depending on how you count. And while people have primarily done wassailing for fruit trees like apples and pears, and we do
hmm.
have apples and pears, we also do the wassailing for our oaks and our chestnuts and our hazelnuts and the maples because all of them produce, food in abundance, not only for us, but for other beings on the land. And so we sort of start our cycle like in the deepest part of winter with the wassailing. And then from there, sort of move into various seasonal celebrations to continue that reciprocation and reverence and respect, thinking about that whole wheel of the year.
So for someone that's really just getting acclimated to earth-based spirituality, druidry, paganism, things of that nature, would you tell our listeners what wassailing is?
Yes. So while sailing, well, let me back up.
Sure.
There, when we think about, well, I'll just talk about the broad idea of it and then how wassailing is a specific thing. So when we think about human cultures over long periods of time that were deeply embedded with their local ecosystems, you see a whole set of different kinds of practices than we have in our modern culture. And a lot of those are due to the interconnection and interrelationship of humans and land. So if you have to produce everything that you need, shelter, food, clothing, warmth from the land. Your relationship with the land is different. And that's why I mean, I don't know if I can put a percentage of it, but probably like a good third to a good half of many cultures' celebrations tie to either blessing the land, ensuring abundant harvests, honoring the gods so that they will ensure abundant harvests, and also being grateful for receiving those harvests. So if you think about the fertility festivals in the spring and the harvest festivals and all of even like today we can see this in modern America with things like apple festivals and pawpaw festivals and sort of just honoring that abundance. And so apple wassailing, there's sort of two versions of it. One is where you go around and you sing to your neighbors around Yuletide. But the second one, the one I'm talking about, is essentially a really ancient tradition of blessing apples and pears. And part of the reason that apples and pears were so important for so long is obviously they store really well, super abundant, magical trees. But a lot of people really depended on them for clean drink. So there were a lot of time periods in history. Think about history in Europe where pollution was a problem, especially with the rise of industrialization, or water was not safe to drink. So people actually drank lightly fermented cider almost all the time. So cider was this really keystone part. I mean, even kids would drink it like that's just what you drank because it was safe. It did not have pathogens, all these things, right? So then people developed all of these ceremonies, and I was introduced to this back almost 20 years ago now by some friends who were really into cider making, and they had found some old traditions. And there was like songs. The very first one we did, we all gathered. It was really cold. It was probably like 10 degrees. We probably had like 20 people. And so this is to give you an example of it. We gathered around, you pick like the largest tree in the orchard, and
Hmm.
then everyone has hot cider. And then we also had a king and a queen that had that one, and I was the queen, so I got to put toast on the tree, and then the king offered the cider. And then we did a lot of noise making because you were going to basically make sure that none of the evil spirits that could harm the tree were there. So you drove them away with noise, and then you offered the tree thanks. And then after that, we all went and feasted on apple things. And it wasn't like an overtly druid celebration. A lot of people there weren't druids, but it was still a really fun way of sort of just saying, hey, apples, we love you. We're going to protect you. We hope for your abundance this year. Here's the blessing. And there's all kinds of them. And even like big apple orchards are starting to do those again here in the United States. And I think, and there's places in the world where those traditions never really like got, really died out. So I think that's a nice example of sort of thinking about an embedded tradition in a culture or in multiple cultures, in this case, Western culture, right? People that where apples grow, that is really connected with a piece of the land that is very sacred and very meaningful, and that's connected right to human health and human well-being and human needs. So you can sort of see that interconnection piece. So I've sort of expanded the ceremony myself, where I go out every year and I offer abundance and blessings and ceremonies and offerings to all of the different like fruit and nut bearing trees and
Hmm.
any other tree that might produce a harvest. Um, and then there's interesting because I don't know what this specifically looked like, but I have found reference to indigenous ceremonies here in North America that were tied to maple trees.
Hmm.
That they had done abundant ceremonies, and I've only seen like footnotes of that in books. I don't know what that, and I haven't. I've asked a couple of my indigenous friends, and their particular traditions didn't have them, or they didn't survive. But there's some evidence, at least a little bit of evidence, that suggests that these are pretty widespread, which is super cool. So when we think about these sort of spring ceremonies and sort of thinking about spring, this idea of like, a practical takeaway, I think, from this very first part of our conversation is how do you go out and honor your land?
Hmm.
How do you go out and offer prayers and offerings and blessings so that your land will be abundant and fruitful, which benefits everyone.
It does. And it brings back the other thing is I can remember often through the years of even doing uh, pouring sweat lodge ceremonies. And we would gather little bits of food together and we would put them outside the lodge. And we said we were putting them there for our terminology for that was putting them out there for the little people. And
Mhm.
it was very, very special. And I can remember more than one occasion, and people can say whatever they want, but I was in the midst of a sweat lodge one time, and we were talking about doing that, and we would take our chanupas, which of course is the pipe. We'd take the pipe and we'd set it out on a stand or just kind of a makeshift stand, just twigs or whatever, and we'd put it right outside the sweat lodge. And we got done. During the ceremony, I should say, we heard some just activity, I'll say, outside. And where we were, there was no one else around, nobody.
Mhm.
And at the end of the ceremony, we went out and the pipes had been moved, not
Whoa.
broken, but moved. And I went, we just looked at each other and said, okay. For anybody that ever doubts, it really does happen. And it was
Yeah, it
almost,
works. It
yeah,
works.
it almost, honest to goodness, Dana, it almost sounded like I heard little bits of, I'm going to say laughter,
Hmm.
quiet laughter, and what was hee, 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 kind of a thing. And it was magical. It was so cool. So yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
didn't mean to get off on it, but it's that connection I think is so important, and it's one of the things that I want to look at again as we look at the wheel of the year. And it's
Mhm.
not just spring, it's throughout the year, as you've already related to, is the connection that we have to maintain or should remain connected with the natural world throughout the year, through the wheel of the year, because there's always something happening and always something very unique and always something very magical if we just pause long enough to do it.
Yeah, and I think beyond pausing, I would say offer gratitude. I think
Mm.
the land is nourished through your gratitude.
Hmm.
The land, when you think about, and we think about what is happening large scale throughout the world right now, the destruction of the ecosystem, the destruction of the biosphere for profit, right? We as people that are interested in nature and honoring nature and as allies of nature, I think one of the best things that we can do, other than obviously a lot of direct protection of the land and regeneration of the land, which I think we also are going to talk about today,
Mm.
is just offering gratitude and offering that nourishment. I think it's important to realize that humanity is, I don't know, somewhere a couple 100,000 years old, perhaps,
Hmm.
depending on how you count. Maybe
Sure.
older if you count some of our sort of proto-human ancestors. But that's an awful long time, and I guarantee you that we were doing those kinds of ceremonies as we evolved. And I like to think that the land and the plants and the animals, we all evolved together in those reciprocal gratitude-oriented relationships. And so the more that we work now to bring that sort of gratitude back, I think that is really nourishing and really important for our relationship with the land.
It
And
is.
being really intentional about that, right? In the way that we're intentional when we're offering wassailing ceremonies or making an offering, regardless of whether or not the tree says, yes, you can tap me this year. We're still going to make an offering and offer gratitude, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you go back the hundreds of thousands of years, and every time I see some different things on social media or in the news or whatever, they seem to be uncovering one more tour over in the British Isles, or one
Yeah.
more thing in Egypt or what have you, and they got that keeps going back, don't they, Dana? That it's not a few hundred years, no, it's tens of thousands of years, and they're saying, "Oh, look at this! It's and now we're able to see now that it is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years that there really was that human relationship with the natural world, and it is it's like that proverbial few seconds on the world clock of
Yeah.
our actual state of being, and how many thousands of years was there before where all this honoring took place."
Yeah. I think about that a lot because, you think about today and it's kind of dire right now. Like, like it's
Yeah.
things are pretty rough out there, and you think about that, and I just have to remember that we're on an ancient planet, and we ourselves are ancient beings, and we're not designed for what's happening now any more
Mm-mm.
than anything else is. And this is kind of just a blip, right? And it's
Yeah.
important. That helps sometimes, get through the day. You're looking at all these
Uh-huh.
terrible news stories, and you're like, oh, and like, you know what though, I'm gonna go outside and I'm not gonna read this. I'm gonna go outside and hang out with some trees,
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. We find ourselves turning off the news that much more.
Hmm.
And I remember I just heard Dave the Bard talk recently on Druidcast, and he says, "Do you know there's a difference between we're going to hear the news or we're going to hear some news?"
Mm,
You
I
know,
like that. Yeah.
and it's like there's a big difference. There's a big gulf there, but I don't want to go there. I want to get to something really interesting here. Like
Yeah.
not that we haven't been, but I think you touched on it in our last chat that we had together. And we talked a little bit about regenerative care of the
Mhm.
land and how important it is to bring that about within our own being. And we can do it individually, we can do it as a group, we can do it in so many ways. But what kind of thoughts do you have about regenerative care for the land that we could look at and maybe improve ourselves as we're looking at spring and planting and so forth?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's a good time to be thinking about regenerative work, and what that looks like in the ecosystem and what that looks like throughout your life. So again, let's think about what humans are meant to be versus what we're actually doing in terms of life right now, right?
Yeah.
So I always point to Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk. how indigenous thinking can save the world, because I think that Tyson Yunkaporta has most clearly outlined, and I think the other person that does this really well is Robin Wall Kimmerer, particularly in Serviceberry, but also in Braiding Sweetgrass. Those books really outline very clearly how indigenous peoples across the world understand relationship with nature. And Tyson Yunkaporta specifically talks about the Aboriginal and Australian indigenous people recognizing that every being in the world has a role to play. Your cat, the trees, and he actually goes into many different beings on the Australian landscape. And he says, and in the indigenous view is that humans, our original goal is to be guardians and caretakers of the land. That is
Yes.
what we are meant to do, and that is what we do best. And so if you sort of take that as your basic principle, and I think another place that I draw from when I start thinking about regenerative care is permaculture. And I practice a lot of permaculture, and I use permaculture a lot where I live with my partner on our little farm here, our little homestead here, but also teach it. And it's all rooted in care, right? So care being three pieces: people care, earth care, and fair share. And I usually like to add self-care and spirit aware to that, but that's not core permaculture. Um, but when we think about that, all those pieces, then it becomes really clear that part of how we can be good humans, how we can be good ancestors, and how, to be honest, how do we respond to today's age, right? How do we respond to this age of the Anthropocene where things just seem to get darker and darker and harder and harder? We can respond with direct action on our land and our ecosystem. And I think that looks really different for different people, right?
Hmm.
But this idea that we will then actively work to help our ecosystems. And I think the word regeneration is particularly important because so many ecosystems right now have been damaged due to human activity. I mean, I don't, even, and because of large scale climate change, even ecosystems that might be super remote or, like think about like Alaska or the Arctic that don't necessarily have humans directly on them are still being impacted. So
Yep.
then what do you do? Well, you do what you can. You do what you can where you're planted in your own way. We grow where we planted. I like to have that. I like that phrase a lot. And that could look really different for different people. So, it might be like a very common one is you live in the suburbs or maybe you live in the city, but you have some lawn, right? The lawn is a really great example. So the lawn is a consumptive space. It requires fossil fuels. It requires you to be in this sort of relationship where you're constantly battering down nature and you're saying, "Hey, nature, I don't want you to grow. I don't want bugs here. I'm just going to mow you down." And
Yeah.
it's usually also litigated, right? There's laws. Like you can't just stop mowing your grass. I tried that when I got super radical and got myself in trouble with my local township up in Michigan when I lived there. Now I have geese. So we actually have movable pasture, and so we maintain a lot of the lawns on our property. Actually, they're all grazing areas now, so they're working. So now instead of us creating using a lawnmower to mow every week to keep nature under control, in quotes, right?
Yeah.
Now the spaces of lawn that are left that we haven't converted into gardens are grazed by animals, which is actually how lawns came about. So you could look at your own lawn and say, okay, do I want to maintain this place where there's no food, there's no habitat, there's no real ecosystem, and I have to use fossil fuels, which contribute to climate change? Or can I convert that lawn into something else? What about a butterfly sanctuary? What about a wildlife field? What about an organic garden that includes a lot of places for wildlife to be there? Insect habitat, an herbal medicine garden.
Mm.
Pretty much anything would be better than that lawn, right? A pond. So that becomes then wherever you are, like that's the first step is sort of like how do I cultivate an ecosystem where I live? I've seen people do this with a porch patio where they literally get a lot of beautiful herbs and they plant them and
Oh
then they
yeah.
have flowering herbs and they're inviting the bees and the butterflies and maybe they have a hummingbird feeder and suddenly there's life coming in. So that like a basic idea of like how can I be a good steward? How can I be a good guardian? How do I, wherever I am, in the most, where I look at where I live and what I have control over, how do I regenerate that land? If you don't have land of your own, that's not a problem. There's so much land out there that could use your care. And that's when you can get into things like taking over a part, tending a piece of land no one else cares for, or, the piece of land under the bridge by the power line, by the railroad tracks. What can you do there? Or
Hmm.
going into your forests and gathering seeds of native species and scattering them and spreading them. And I mean, there's so many things that, you don't have to have a piece of land to be a regenerative force. You can partner with conservation organizations that are doing things like tree plantings and river cleanup and also stream monitoring. Like we have a lot of that around here because we have acid mine drainage from mines. So there's a lot of stream monitoring, and they just need people to go out every couple weeks and take samples from streams. So there's so many ways that you could get involved in like, how do I give back rather than just take from the ecosystem? And I think that's all tied to regenerative. Like there's regenerative practices and a regenerative mindset.
For the longest time, we heard the word sustainability. And I had an opportunity to look into that a while back with another guest, and he really opened my eyes because he says, the difference between sustainability or sustaining something and regenerating it. Sustaining means just simply means we're going to keep it like it is.
Hmm.
And regenerative says we're going to improve it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
they're
said,
actually really different
wow,
mindsets. Yeah. Yeah.
mind blown.
Yeah, and I think that sustainability has also become extraordinarily like greenwashed, right? So
Oh, yeah.
everything is sustainable, even though it really isn't.
Mm,
It's all sustainable this and sustainable that. And I look at that term and I'm like, but why are we sustaining something that's actually causing more death and more destruction on the planet? So I don't like I used to use the term sustainability. And like I still teach in like say a sustainability studies program on my campus, but I
sure.
don't like the term and I do it in the classes I teach or in my herbalism classes or whatever. I don't really like that term and I sort of shift students from this idea of sustainability and into regenerative. And I think that's also rooted in like permaculture uses that shift a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
do you want to do less bad or do you want to do good, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how can we think about impact as something really positive? Impact on the ecosystem. That could be something really good if you're, creating habitat for bees.
Oh, yeah. And how often do you see, earlier a couple of months ago, I was seeing this stuff in social media and I'm seeing in some of the things that I'm reading. And one of the things they talk about, all that leaf litter that you've got out there,
Oh,
leave
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
alone. Leave it
Of course,
alone.
of course. Yes,
There's
because
little critters in there that have laid
right.
eggs and they just want to be left alone.
Yes. Yeah, because again, like this is, I think part of this problem we have is that we have in the last, and this is not long, we're talking 1950s, 1960s, a
Hmm.
lot of the current practices on the land came about, right? So things like maintaining the lawn, things like blowing your leaves in the winter. But if you think about it, like the most important thing you can do is let nature be nature. So the leaves fall in the fall. There's a reason they're falling. They should get to stay there till spring. That's a natural process you shouldn't disrupt, right? And that's one of the ways I think about it, is sort of like a lot of this requires you to spend a lot of time really just deeply observing nature and just sort of taking it in and learning. So yeah, I mean, so I'm really committed to that sort of practice too. It's like, okay, well, what is already happening in my ecosystem?
Yep.
Where are the animals going? Oh, I see these bugs that are coming out of these leaves in the spring, right? Like, and really thinking about working with nature for these regenerative practices. You're probably not going to be very regenerative if you go to the big box store and buy all the things you need, right? You know, there was this really interesting article that came out a couple of years ago that suggested that community gardens were terrible for the planet. And when you looked and you dug into it, it was a research, I think, from the University of Michigan, and it kind of caused a big hubbubaloo. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And when you looked into it, it wasn't that community gardens were bad for the planet. It was that the impact of all of the materials that a community garden would import in, like all of the wood, all of the compost, all of the signage, all of the screws, had an impact. But the longer that they used the garden, the more it was sustaining over time. In about 10 years, that balance would shift. So it's also, I think a regenerative mindset is also thinking really carefully about your resource use. Like, am
Mm.
I going, like here we create a lot of our raised beds. We wait for trees to fall and then we cut them up and bring them up and use them as like the edges of our beds, and then they rot down and turn into mushrooms, and then we put that in the bed and then put more and then put another one out. And it's just a matter of sort of waiting for the resources to fall naturally or whatever. So then we're not going to the big box store and buying a bunch of supplies. Or we actually have a lot of stone here, so we do a lot of stone work. So it's sort of like, what are your resources that already exist that may even be other people's like trash, right? How
Hmm.
can you not create additional demand on the planet, because the whole consumer goods thing is just a terrible cycle. So there's like I guess like what I'm saying is like there's not only regenerative practices, like I mentioned, like the lawn, and I can talk about some others, but there's also this sort of regenerative mindset that I think is just as important, where we really have to question the narratives that we are given about things like how do you tend the land outside your house? How do you engage? Like, why would you? And really question, like, just because you've seen lawns your whole life, like somebody that came from another century would look around at what happened to this ecosystem and be like, what's all this green space? Why aren't there animals here? Why
Hmm.
aren't there forests? So really taking a step back from sort of these modern things that we've been socialized into and saying, actually, like, how does nature do this? And how can I better align with the natural resources that exist, and that I'm not putting more consumer demand on it. And you could go into this in a lot of different ways, like all sorts of ways. We could talk about this for hours, but we won't. Um, but I think that this mindset is really, really important because I see so many people that want to do good. And I'll give you another example, like native plants. Like, yeah, if you want to create native habitat, are you going to start by dumping a bunch of chemicals all over the land to kill everything that is there?
No,
Is that actually what nature would do?
no.
No. Like,
Nature would grow it out of its space.
yeah, yeah.
It would just
Well,
overtake it. Yeah.
yeah, or it would, or nature would be like, okay, there's a new person in town, and in 100 years, somebody's gonna come and eat all that multiflora rose that's out there. Just hasn't happened yet, So I really think a lot about like how do I align myself with nature and not with chemical companies and treasure, chemically treated wood that I could put in my garden beds. Like,
Mhm.
you've gotta think about it both internally and externally.
Yeah, and at a raised bed, I remember a long time ago when I was building my first raised bed, and I even actually made a platform that was 4 feet off the ground, and there you go, getting those materials and everything. But one of the things they talked about, of course, and we don't think about that is well, I'll just get some, pressure treated lumber, and I'll use it for that. Why? Well, it resists insects, it resists, water, all this kind of stuff. But do you realize the what's the name of it, Dana? Copper copper
Mhm.
sulfate? Is that what it
Yeah, the
was?
green, the stuff that's green on pressure treated wood. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they say, well, I use it. Do you realize that that copper sulfate makes its way into your body because your vegetables are growing with that? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
wait a minute, I'm being pressure treated. Yeah, you
Yeah,
are.
you are. Yeah. Also, your corn has about a 5 foot root system. So if it's not connected to the earth, how's your corn going to grow in that bed?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's just simply
yeah,
not the way that it could.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
one of the things that you just said a minute ago prompted my thought process a little bit, and that is that how does nature do it? And if we want to really get into, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that if I really want to get into regenerative care, maybe a little bit of it still goes back to the thing that we preach on basically all the time is get outside and watch, get outside and look, sit down
Mhm.
next to the tree and just watch the ants, watch the birds, watch what everybody's doing and get an idea. Maybe that's what I could do. And one other thing was when you're talking about utilizing what's there and you're talking about your garden beds and things like this, and you're using the wood that's there. When
Mhm.
we built our home here, of course, we had to clear a fair number of trees. And Dana, there's still some of those trees left. And
Mhm.
I went back into some of the old stuff that I remember from indigenous people that we kind of hung with for a long time. And that is you never put anything to waste, you never throw anything away, but you put it back to use in the land that it was grown in. And that's where they would actually utilize the wood and they would build their shelters with it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because that's honoring the wood. It's part of what the wood wants to do for us. And we need to
Yeah,
give
yeah.
back that same sense. So
Mhm.
I'm building my grove. It's a work in progress, but I'm building my sacred grove and I started looking at it and it's everything's a slope around here.
Mhm. Yeah,
And I
same.
think,
We're on a mountain
yeah,
completely.
and I'm
There's
thinking,
no flat space.
so I need to go back to my local big box store and get some more retaining blocks, right? No, wait a minute. Hold a second. Why can't I use those logs that I cut down
Mhm.
and just stack them on top of each other?
Mhm.
And there's my retaining wall.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
somebody says, "Well, it's not going to last." Well, I'm not going to last as long as those things are going to still be there. You know?
Right, but what does that mean it's not going to last? I mean, that means you're essentially resisting this
Yeah,
nature's own processes
yeah.
of decay and rebirth, right?
Yeah, and they're
Yeah,
going to do what they need to do, and that's okay.
yeah,
It may grow a brand new hill there because of
yeah.
what's been done.
Yeah, and I feel like from a magical perspective, like I had my very first grove when we moved here about 10 years ago was down by the creek. And creek, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. That would
That's
be a
okay. I
creek.
got it.
That'd be a creek for everyone who's not from Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
A little stream, a little river. And the people that had this property before us did some pretty serious logging. So we came in, we loved the land, but we're like, wow, like it really sucks that they did all this logging. It was like partially logged, right? And it's really cool to watch the forest regenerate. But yeah, there was this stump that I decided right next to the creek that I decided I was going to do a lot of my magical work and my druid work at and my meditations and my daily meditations and everything. And what's so fascinating is sort of watching that stump over a period of 10 years. If I had wanted to preserve that stump, I would have lost the regenerative, like watching the mushrooms come. There's a bunch of turkey tail that showed up like the third year and broke a bunch of the wood down. And then later we had the Gallerina marginata, the deadly Gallerina, show up there. And it was really interesting in terms of just watching the fungal life and the insects burrow in, and then a couple of floods came and knocked and it was just like watching this. It became part of the magic was seeing nature cycle through like this living tree that was cut to this stump bursting with mushrooms, and now it's sort of half decayed, and I really like it. I don't really use it as a grove anymore because I've sort of moved to different places on the land since, but I still like to walk down there and just sort of see that evolution. And I think that too many times humans try to resist those processes, right? we
Yep.
we try to fight them, like we're not part of that. So yeah, like yeah, I mean, it would suck if your garden beds broke down in the next year after you made them, but that's not going to happen anyways.
No.
You can just use some
Mm-mm.
rot resistant wood like cedar or black locust, and you could have beds for 30 years anyways. Like it's just a matter of knowing that though. Oh, there's a big stand of black locust, and hey, the septic line is going to come through here and cut down these 40 black locust trees. Could I get a hold of those? Because they're really a great resource for fence posts and garden beds. And, like those are the ways that those are the ways to think about some of this. So I think that that's what I mean about the regenerative mindset.
Hmm.
It's really sort of taking yourself out of the idea of being a consumer, because we are so socialized into consumptive behaviors and capitalist behaviors, right? I buy something, I consume it, I throw it away. That's a linear line.
Hmm.
And instead of thinking about ourselves as part of this cycle. And for those of you who want to see this firsthand, I have a great suggestion for you. Get into vermicompost. This is worm composting.
Mm.
There's actually a really cool farm here in Pennsylvania called, I think it's called Uncle Sam's or Uncle Ben's, Uncle Ben's. And they sell, like, you could buy a pound or two of red wiggler worms, or you can get other worms. And you can it's a really simple, I actually talk about how to do this in my book, Sacred Actions. I have directions and a graphic, but you can also just Google it, a vermicompost bin, and then get your worms and start throwing things in there. And what you'll discover are really interesting things. Like, for example, you throw your banana peel in there, but your banana peel has a little label. And on that little label, you didn't realize it is a film of plastic. So your worms can break down everything except that piece of plastic. And even when you think you're not putting any plastic in there, it'll blow your mind how much plastic you find when your worms have eaten through everything, because it's all these little pieces you don't realize. And that really shows me the cycle of what is natural and what isn't. And it's a really nice activity to do with kids because they can start to learn like what is within nature's cycle and what sort of is opposed to nature's cycle. You find these pieces of plastic in your worm bin that you didn't think you put in there. You're like, oh, this is terrible, but it's a really good lesson.
Can you, okay, so I don't want to go too far down a rabbit
Yeah.
hole here, but I got you got my curiosity now on the worm thing. Can you do that with a compost bin? The
hmm
turnable thing is so you can, is that something you could do to that, or do you need to set up something different for it?
You wouldn't want a turning compost bin because a turning compost bin would actually harm the worms when you were turning
Yeah, I
it.
would think so, because
Yeah. But
sorry.
you can definitely set up, it depends on where you live. Like here in Pennsylvania, I'm in USDA Zone 6. The worms, like the red wigglers that are best for vermicomposting, don't survive the winter. So you would keep, this is actually more like I keep this in my basement and, feed them twice a week with various
Oh,
food
we got
scripts.
a basement. We have a
Yeah,
basement,
yeah.
same footprint as our house.
Yeah, but I've actually I had a really awesome trip of a lifetime to Costa Rica about maybe 15 years ago. And when I was there, like in more tropical climates, people have them in bins and they just stay outside year round. So you can also like there's lots of systems and I was cool to be in like I went and visited all these regenerative ag farms and meeting people that were doing they had like these stacked bins with vermicompost with various like stages of decay so the worms would kind of work their way up and down. So I think there's a lot of, and of course that vermicompost, that those worm casings and the worm tea that's made from that is super nutrient rich. So if you are concerned because you don't the fertilizer, right? So do I need fertilizer? What does my soil look like? If you're converting a lawn into a garden, chances are your soil probably sucks. Like, it probably doesn't have a lot of nutrients. Most commercial soils are now deficient in things like not NPK, but everything else, like magnesium is a good example. Like, but your body really needs magnesium, plants need magnesium, but I guarantee you that your lawn does not probably have a lot of magnesium. So how do you get it? The worms are actually really helpful for that. So
Ah,
there's all sorts of, so like, yeah, once you start getting into this stuff, my suggestion for people who want to learn is, there's lots of ways to learn, but I found the most empowering thing I've ever done in terms of these topics was to do my permaculture design certificate. I did it in person at an eco village. I did it with a group called Sewing Solutions, which they're up in the like up in Massachusetts. And it was truly like the most like I think I was there for like 16 or 17 days, like 2 weeks. And it was like the most transformative thing in it. I've never been the same since I did that. And it really opened my eyes up just not only to like ways of thinking and ways of interaction, ethics, and then sort of laying a foundation upon which I built not only my physical regenerative practice, but my like spiritual regenerative practice?
I do. And my mind is going elsewhere too. And we talk about we want to get ourselves more involved in the natural world and we want to try and get involved in regenerative work. And some of the thing, and sometimes we might say, well, I live in an apartment. How am I going to do this? And you had mentioned earlier that, get involved with a group or something like that. And for an example, it just came to mind. We have a volunteer group right here in our community that whose job is to maintain the wellness, the regenerative capabilities of a mountain that's
Yeah.
near us. It's like
Yeah.
3,800 feet. It's no big deal by comparison of 7,000 feet down the road, but it's working
Yeah.
with the land in such a way that it becomes more vibrant and more alive. Um,
Yeah.
and you can find stuff like that, and it's
hmm
out there. All you got to do is we have this wonderful thing called the internet.
Yeah.
It can be bad, it can be good, and one of the good things of it is you can use it as a resource to help you find some opportunities like this that are right there. I happen to know that you wrote a book and you just referenced it only once so far. And I know a couple of years ago you wrote it with Sacred Actions Journal, and that's something you can get and you can start with it. Tell us
Yeah.
about that book.
All right. Well, I would say
Sort of it.
all of my books kind of have that theme that I think a lot of the books that I've written all of them focus on rebuilding human land connections and what does that look like. So Sacred Actions was my first book produced through Red Feather Schiffer. that came out in 2021, and the Sacred Actions Journal, which is like a companion workbook, came out in 2022. Those books are really like, how do I transform my everyday life into more regenerative approaches to the land? I was still using the term sustainable when I wrote that book, but I really meant regeneration, you know. Hindsight's 2020. And so I actually walk through the wheel of the year in that book, sharing strategies from everything from like food and home to cooking and community. And so that's where a lot of the strategies like sheet mulching as opposed to using a raised bed approach, mimicking nature for building your garden beds, or the vermicompost is in there. There's all kinds of stuff. So those are sort of like, that's the book on like everyday action, I think would be the best way of talking about it.
Yeah.
Um, and then my second, I mean, that's like a pair of books. And then my second theme, I wrote a book on land healing, which came out 2 years ago, which I think didn't we do a talk on that?
No,
Maybe
but
we
we
did.
need to
Okay.
just mark that down.
The land healing book. And the land healing book focuses on physical and metaphysical regenerative practices for the land. So that would be everything like the blessing ceremonies where we started to actually building re re I would say building refugia, like
Mm.
how do I create small pockets of life that are safe from all of this chaos, right? And how is that a really important practice? So there's a lot of pieces of that. And then my newest book, which is Ecospirituality for the 20th Century, does have a chapter on regeneration.
Yes, it
Um,
does.
among some other chapters. And that I would say is my broadest scale book, where it's sort of like, how do we rebuild human society and rebuild ourselves using these techniques? So they're all kind of at different scopes and with different focuses, but my broad theme that I've been exploring in different ways is, yeah, how do we become good, how do we become good ancestors? And how do
Yeah.
we use nature spirituality as a foundation for regenerative practices in the world, and how do we provide a counter to all of the sort of dystopian narratives that we are being fed right now, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah. I know one of the things that I heard you talk about once was seed balls. And I
Yeah,
and that's in your book. Tell us what a seed ball is. I hope you're going to go
yeah,
into it like
yeah.
you did.
Magic sea balls. Okay. So a dear friend of mine taught me about these many, many years ago. And now again, we're not going to do this as a consumer. We're going to do this, although you might buy seeds from a seed company, especially a
Hmm.
good one. Um, is you go get 50% clay and then 50% compost. And I like to do this in a 5-gallon bucket. Make sure your clay is nice and broken up. If you live in an area with high clay content, you can just go to like a river bank, or when a tree falls down and there's a bunch of like the subsoil.
Yep.
A lot of like where I live, there's a ton of we probably have like 80% clay in our subsoil. So you can just dig that subsoil up, and if you feel it when it's moist and it kind of sticks together, you're good. You can also supplement with some clay if you needed to, but really like try to find it. And then you basically get that clay into a good place, not too many rocks, mix it in with the compost, and then you kind of have your media. Then what I like to do is take a tarp or a plastic garbage bag, like, or whatever, like a chicken feed bag. I'll reuse that, right? Cut it open and then lay it all out. And then you put whatever seeds you want to put into it. And I make different ones for different purposes. So if I'm going to be hanging out in urban environments, I make a really different blend than if I'm going to be hanging out on my mountains, especially where I go. I do a lot of land healing for places that have been impacted significantly by coal mining over time. So we
Mm.
have these places that have very little soil and are having a real struggle in regenerating. So I basically, or I have a blend for like native woodland medicinal species that are rare that have been over harvested. So things like ramps and ginseng and black cohosh.
Mm.
So what I do is, as much as possible, I go out in my ecosystem, and like that third category, right? I go gather black cohosh seeds. There happens to be a park about 20 minutes from me that has the nicest stand of black cohosh because it's an old growth park. And
Mm.
so I go and I gather some of those black cohosh seeds from a place that's really abundant. I cold stratify them and then I make seed balls. Then I go into parks that should have black cohosh that have the exact same kind of ecosystem, same slope, everything, but that's not there anymore because there was too much repeated logging. So I then essentially take black cohosh and ginseng and ramps and blue cohosh and trillium and all these medicinal, mostly medicinal woodland species that are really becoming quite rare. And I put them in those balls. So I spread those seeds out and then I kind of ball them up and then I let them dry and then I stick them in an egg carton. So I got 12 of them at a time. I can hand them to friends, give them to kids. Kids love doing this.
Okay.
And then you essentially have your seed balls. So then you could just kind of stick some in your pocket and go out and toss them out your car. You could toss them onto paths. And if you want to get really druidical about it, you could also do all kinds of blessing ceremonies. So you can embed your blessings in the seed balls and then scatter them. If I go into an urban area, I might think about food. How do I put some food and some herbs in the ground for the community? So I can go to places again, like those places that's like overgrown, no one cares about it. Toss a couple seed balls in there, and now you got some tomatoes growing, or you've got some
Ah,
herbs, some oregano, right? Or you can do like I have a wildflower blend for species that I don't see as much that should be here. So I have like asters in that blend and echinacea and things like that. Milkweed, a lot of milkweed. I usually do 50% milkweed. And so I've sort of crafted these blends based on my observations of my local ecosystem and based on paying attention to understanding what my ecosystem should be like and what it needs versus what exists, right? And just my observations on what species are in decline. We have a lot of roadside spraying here in Pennsylvania, so there's certain
mhm.
species that often were in the niche of that border. So I crafted some balls that I could toss out my car when no one's looking, you know? And then what is nice is that that little seed ball, as the rain hits it or the ice or whatever, it breaks down, and then the compost gives a little nutrition where the clay holds it together. So you can end up with these really powerful tools, and you could put all kinds of blessings and healing. And, it's a nice thing too, because if you're out with a group of people that don't want you to like, start doing a big ceremony in the middle of your hike, you just like take a couple balls and kind of toss them around.
Yeah.
So I think they're really like, there's a lot of people who use these for guerrilla gardening. It's a kind of a big movement. So I love them. They're one of my favorite spiritual and regenerative tools.
Guerrilla gardening. Nothing like
Guerrilla
it.
gardening, no?
Make it happen, make it work.
Yeah,
And once again, our time is gone. Poof. What is it with us? We
I
get
don't
going
know.
on stuff like this, and it's just we just go and go and go, and it's awesome. I so appreciate the work that you're doing, and
Oh,
so,
thanks.
so many folks. I know that in the Ancient Order of Druids in America, you've been with them for several years now, and you
I've been
folks
with
are
them for
doing
20 years.
how long?
20.
My goodness.
I
Okay.
joined, yeah, I actually am hitting actually I think I just hit my 20th year because I joined at Imulk, but I didn't do my initiation until spring equinox, but yeah, I joined in 2007 and it's 2026, so I've been with the AODA for 20 years. I've been in leadership in some form or another since 2013, and I've been Grand Archdruid since 2019.
Congratulations. That's
So yeah, I've
awesome.
been
20
with them a
years.
long time. Yeah.
Yeah. I know I reference Obad a fair amount of times because I'm involved with them.
Yeah, I am
But
too.
yeah, I know you are. But I was wondering if you could just give the listeners a little bit more information about the Ancient Order of Druids in America
Mhm.
and what
Sure.
what the mission is, what you're doing, and how people can move forward and work with them if they'd like.
Sure. So AODA, despite the name that says in America, we are now an international order. We are a nonprofit organization, so everything that we do is for members or for the earth. And I think that's important.
Hmm.
Not all Druid orders are nonprofit, but we're very committed to that status. Nobody gets paid for anything. We do have two paid staff members, but they do things like accounting and bookkeeping, like things that we can't get volunteers to do. So AODA, I think the real emphasis on AODA is wildcrafting your own Druidry. What does Druidry look like in your specific ecosystem, with your own specific cosmology? We're also, I would say, really welcoming and supportive of diverse Druid paths. We don't want everyone to look the same. We don't want everybody to believe the same. And we like to foster an ecosystem of Druidry, where there are different Druidries and everyone's Druidry looks a little different. And that creates a more interesting and weird and holistic whole. So what we like to do is provide people tools, and even the rituals that we have in the order are really adaptable so that, like our daily protection, we have a daily protective ritual that everyone does called the Sphere of Protection, which is actually a lot more than protection. It's sort of energy raising, balancing, protection, leveling out. Like it's got all kinds of functions. But that ritual, for example, is like if I did it, it would look maybe potentially quite different than a different person who might have, like I'm an animist, right? But we would have maybe a Christian druid or a Buddhist druid or somebody who's a polytheist. All of theirs would look different than mine. We'd all be calling upon slightly different energies and powers, but in the end, you could still tell. So I think that's one of the things that we do really well is we really focus on how do we support unique expressions of druidry, recognizing that people have lots of different ways that they experience the world. We've done a lot to support neurodiverse people and people with disabilities, ensuring that we also have a really accessible druidry. Um, and I think the other thing that we really are strong and really focused in is the idea that there is lots of sort of lots of paths up the mountain and people
Mm.
get to choose. So do you want to focus on bardic arts? Do you want to focus on your druid arts? Different people sort of choose different emphases. Like everyone has a core set of like we're all going to celebrate the solstices and equinoxes, although what it looks like is up to you. If you want, you can join our land healing rituals, which are order wide. Um, but and we have like teach you meditation techniques and nature meditation and things like that. But what does your individual druid practice look like? Are you going to practice astrology? Are you going to learn how to read Ogham? Are you going to grow a giant garden? All of those are options within the tradition. So I think that sort of that emphasis on a diet, creating a diverse ecosystem of druids, and really learning your ecosystem. We are a path of knowledge, of wisdom, of nature wisdom and nature knowledge. We don't, our member, if you're with AODA for a couple of years, you'll go into your woods and you'll understand what you're seeing. You'll know the names of the plants, you'll know the names of the animals. Maybe you learn to study birds and bird call, or you understand the geology. So we also really pride ourselves on not just being like ignorant consumers of nature, but rather like knowledgeable people that understand the ecosystem. And we understand that takes time, but that's an important part of because we can't really work with nature on a deep level if we don't understand nature. And that involves like observation, study, learning, unique experiences, but also all those spiritual expressions. So those are parts of the tradition, I guess. There's lots of other parts. But that I think that AODA Druidry has been really growing. Since I became a druid, I was like I don't know, something like the 50th person, 53rd person in the order. We now have 3,000, over 3,000 people. It's
Wow.
almost 3,100 people. We're growing quite a lot, and it's been really amazing to see. And I think part of it is we had a huge bump in the pandemic, but that hasn't slowed down. It's actually growing even more. Like I thought, because during the pandemic, a lot of people got to go outside and they had time to explore things, and nature was one of the few refuges most people had. So we saw this huge influx of new people into nature-based spiritual traditions like Druidry, and all the Druid orders, all the heads of the Druid orders I talked to, we were all experiencing it. And then I think a lot of us thought, okay, well, people are kind of back to life now. We thought maybe that would slow down, but it's kind of the opposite. Every year we're getting more and more members, and people are really, really interested. And then we also have a really low like fee for entering. So we have scholarships and things available. So we also try to be really financially accessible to people. So yeah, I think that I'm really proud of what we've built. And I've been around, like I said, I've kind of seen the order grow from sort of John Michael Greer essentially revitalized the order from almost near death in 2003. I joined only a couple of years later when they were just getting started, and really seeing the sort of robust, abundant order that we've become. And it's exciting to see that really take place. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think AODA is great. And the nice thing about AODA is because it's such a flexible order, like people can be OBOD members. Like I'm an OBOD member and an AODA member. We have lots of folks who are in like ADF and an AODA. We have people who are like in reclaiming, or like you don't have to choose. Like our practices can align with a lot of other practices. So it can be nice to sort of, and I think they all give you something different. So I think there's real benefit in learning from different orders and different
Hmm.
traditions, and seeing how different druids do things, or different, even different neopagan paths that are earth-centered. There's like real value in that.
Well, that's the cool thing about Druidry to me.
Yeah.
You have so many different opportunities, and I've often said, and it's almost like a cliche statement that, I'm going to stop learning when I'm no longer on this plane of existence.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's always something out there that you can learn that you never saw before, you never paid attention to before. I learned something I learned a few things during our talk today about worm
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's really to me a foundation of how AODA thinks about Druidry is this idea that you are always growing and learning and that there are many different paths and just go take a direction, see where it goes. And if you don't like that direction, come on back and try a different one. And there's not really a right or wrong way to do that. It's
Mm-mm.
really a personal choice. And so I find the community really vibrant because people are just so interested in so many things. And, now we have this like we just started an iNaturalist group for AODA, and it's been
Ah,
fascinating to see all people's like I all mine are mushrooms because I'm working on mushroom club certifications. But some of these folks, like it's great to see like people from Australia posting pictures, and I mean just all of these really cool photos from all over the world of people's nature's observations and that commitment to really the ecosystem. So yeah, it's a pretty great time to be involved in ADA because, like I said, we are growing. We've got a really strong membership driven organization, lots of volunteers, lots of people doing cool things. And we're not, we're really not a top-down organization. People have ideas, like we like to like open doors for people, and we're really interested in like sort of letting the members create the organization they want to. I try to
mm.
mostly just keep the bills paid and get out people's way, and make sure I've been writing a lot of our books. I told people were like, "When's your next book coming out, Dana?" And I was like, "Well, I just had a book come out in October, and right now I'm writing AODA's book, so it's probably going to be a while." I do,
Okay.
though, have a collaborative tarot deck coming out later this year. I
Oh,
can,
don't, that's not fair to throw that out there at the
I
last of the
do.
podcast.
You
So,
want to hear? Okay, I'll give
yeah,
it to
yeah.
you just a little bit. It's called the Deep Earth Astrology Tarot Deck. And it is, I'm collaborating with Robert Passetti, who's a professional astrologer. He's writing the book, and I'm working on the art, and we're sort of collaborating on the whole thing. And we've been working on it for 5 years. It's been a long project. We haven't put a lot of it, actually, there's like almost none of it on the internet because I don't like AI and I don't want it to be stolen before we finish it. So we will be releasing it later this year. The whole thing. I think we have I have 4 cards left to create right now, and that's what I'll be doing tonight. And yeah, so you could look for that later. That's an art project. I probably will put a couple of art projects out in the next year or two, but um,
What's the
these
name of that
kinds of
again?
books,
What's the name of
Deep
that again?
Earth, Deep
Deep
Earth,
Earth
yes.
Astrology.
And it is a combination of herbalism, astrology, and gnomes. So it's a
Oh,
gnome themed herbal astrology deck.
so when can we talk again?
You could bring Rob and I on whenever we put this deck out.
Because it's funny because I've got someone coming on in a couple of weeks that we're going to be talking about their tarot book.
Oh,
And
cool.
so that's going to be interesting in and of itself. So what can we have for we've looked at the regenerative thing, and I'm thinking, I always ask a guest what do they do to create a better life for themselves. We already covered that. So what with you? So what's a good takeaway from, toward a better life from the
Yes.
attitude of regenerative care, would you
All
say,
right.
for the day?
I have 2 things to say on this. The first is don't ever underestimate the importance of self-care. Thinking about regenerative self-care during these challenging times. You aren't going to be able to do good magic. You're not going to be able to do good work in the world if you aren't first making sure that you are taking care of yourself. And I think that a lot of people who are really interested in things like land healing and druidry burn themselves out because they try to do so much in the world without also attending to that core. So, that's something to be aware of. And I think that's one of the pieces of doing this work long term And this is a term where we can use the word sustainable in a sustainable way, right?
Yeah.
Where where you're really invested, but you've got to make sure that you don't burn out. You got to make sure, because a lot of times people get really excited, put a giant garden in, and then the second you're like, oh my goodness, right? So small, slow solutions, right? So I'd say that's the first part. And the second piece then is simply to recognize that you absolutely can be a force of good. And the most impact you can make is right outside your door. Don't
Mm.
worry about things that are happening in faraway places that you don't have control over. You pay attention to what you directly have control over. The difference of you putting in a butterfly and bee sanctuary in your lawn, that is a world of difference to all the insects and life and trees and plants that are there. That is a powerful thing that you can do. And I would argue right now, regenerative approaches to gardening, to land care, are radical actions. They're really disruptive. And it's something that you can do that you feel really good about because you are making a difference right there in your ecosystem in the most local way. And if all of us do that, we build a better world.
We do. That's great. Well, once again, it's been a magical experience, Dana. Thank you ever so much for being a guest today on Toward a Better Life, and welcome spring.
Welcome, spring.
I went to walking on a cold March day. Heard the blackthorn talking, and this is what they say. Rain clouds, even now the days are cold and grey. But we are here, and spring's not far away. The time has come, the in-between. Hedgerow is the flag of green. See the maiden dance and say to the spring, to the spring. I went to walking on a fine March day. Heard the flowers talking, and this is what they say. It is time, we heard the snowdrop cry. So out we come, see the sun, and on we rise. The time has come, the in-between. Hedgerow is the flag of green. See the maiden dance and sing to the spring, to the spring. I went to walking on a late March day. Heard the birds are talking, and this is what they say. Evening song, here we come, with the sun we fly. Celebrate, aviate, lighting up the sky. The time has come, the in-between. Hedgerow is the flag of green. See the maiden dance and sing to the spring, to the spring, to the spring. The time has come, the in-between. Hedgerow is the flag of green. See the maiden dance and sing to the spring.
That was Dave the Bard to close out our program with Raise the Flag of Green from his album of the same name, used with his permission. And that is our show for this week, everybody. Thanks to Dana O'Driscoll for joining me to share ideas on creating beauty in your everyday life with the natural world this spring. If you'd like to learn more about Dana, her work, her books, artwork, or more, there are links in the show notes for her website and her books. There's also a link in the show notes if you're interested to look into AODA, the Ancient Order of Druids in America, so you may check them out as well. And there's also a link in there for Dave the Bard and also Spiral Dance. And also, as always, a very special thanks to you, dear listener, for tuning into the program. I truly do appreciate you listening and spreading the word about Toward a Better Life. If you're seeking insights and advice on how to create that better life for yourself, if you'd like to dive into self-care, self-development, experience hypnotherapy, distant shamanic work, Reiki, whatever the case may be, just visit my website and you'll see, but drop me a line to kevin@towardabetterlife.com for your free discovery call. In that call, we're going to be discussing your goals, set some plans for achieving them, and moving forward with your journey toward a better life. You can also visit the website towardabetterlife.com for past episodes, blog entries, ways to enhance your spiritual journey, and the upcoming events. Please do subscribe to Toward a Better Life through your favorite podcast platform, and do leave a review, please, on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, whatever your podcast platform might be. And this will help spread the word about the podcast and help to create, well, a better life for us one and all. Always remember, if you'd like to share your story, music, or prose, I'd love to share it with the world around us, because so many of you have wonderful talents. Don't keep them in a closet. Share them with me, and just send them out. If you want to be a guest also, please write me, Kevin@towardabetterlife.com. Well, that's it. Until next week, enjoy and spring into your journey toward a better life.